Hello, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast, the show about all things making music. I'm your host, Brian Funk. Right now, I want to introduce you to a really awesome little reverb plugin called Clevverb by Clevgrind. Clevverb is an algorithmic reverb that emulates lots of different rooms. And I'm going to play some drums right here, and we're just going to fool around with the reverb for a couple moments. So we got our drums going, and I'm going to dial in the wet here. This is on a preset called Medium Drum Room. We have control over the decay. Make some nice long reverbs. We can change the size of the room. Now we're in a smaller place. I'll bring the decay down. We can go in a large room and maybe add some extra decay for that. We can damp the reverb. We can raise it. We can add some diffusion and spread. We can even modulate it. Get stuff that's a little more strange and weird. We can adjust the early and late reflections, and we can even EQ things, which is kind of nice on drums. So I can kind of take some of that reverb off the bass right now. You'll be hearing much less reverb on the kick drum, but we still get some of that on the higher elements. Yet the kick drum is left alone a little. And then of course there's the ducking feature, which I think is really awesome. It ducks the reverb out of the way while the signal is going and playing. And we're getting like kind of a pumping effect right now because this is drums. It's kind of neat though. We turn it off and our drums get lost a little bit. But when we turn this effect on, it allows us to still hear the main part of our drums. Bring this down to a more reasonable level. I think it sounds pretty cool on something like that. So that's Clevverb. I invite you to check it out at Clevgrind's site, clevgrind.se. And if you act extremely fast, Clevgrind is giving away Clevverb to any member of my music production club. That's during the month of March or while supplies last. And I still have some download codes. So if you act quickly, you can get a copy of Clevverb when you join the Music Production Club. Go to brianfunk.com/MPC. And now on with the show. It's kind of a cool time for me right now, in a way. March marks the month I began the Music Production Podcast. That was 3 whole years ago now. So I've been doing the podcast now for 3 years, and this episode, number 157, marks the first one of the 4th year of the podcast. So if you think 52 times 3 is 156, that means I've done about an episode a week, although they don't really come out weekly, but that's the average. I'm going to try to make that a little more steady once per week, and I like that pace a lot. It keeps me busy, but it doesn't overwhelm me. And I thought what I'd talk about in this episode was acting the part, because as I think about doing a podcast for 3 years, I still kind of feel like new to it. And it's sometimes funny to say I'm a podcaster because I never really knew that I would be some sort of like broadcaster, radio person, this modern radio type thing that we're doing in podcasts. And act the part, I think, applies to everything in life. I've been doing the podcast now for 3 years, and I still have not received my certificate that explains that I am now a podcaster. This has not arrived in the mail yet, believe it or not. Funny how that works, right? You don't ever get some kind of plaque or award or certificate or label that makes you officially something. You just become that thing by acting like that thing. One of the first times I ever heard someone talk about this was kind of in a funny way by, I think it was Liam Gallagher of the band Oasis. And he was in some kind of interview years ago, and he's like, I'm a rock star. And it's loaded with lots of colorful language, but he's like, I'm a rock star. This is what I am. This is what I do. So don't be surprised, if he's going to do rock star things, sex, drugs, rock and roll type of stuff. Destroying hotel rooms. Like, he was owning that position. And one thing he said is like, if you want to be a rock star, act the part. You're not just going to one day get a record deal and then you can start being a rock star. You got to start being that rock star right away. And then, it was all about like owning it. I'm going to put a link to a different interview because I couldn't find that interview, but it's another interview with Liam Gallagher where he's just got this sort of no apologies attitude about who he is and what he does. And it's really nice, even as the interviewer sort of like questions him a little bit on himself and his relevance to the music world. And he is who he is, and he knows it, and he acts the part, whether you like him or not. It's brilliant how he is unapologetically himself. And I think that applies to us, as music makers and whatever we are. I like to think about that you are whatever you are doing in the moment. This idea like you're that thing. If you're doing it, you're that thing. If you're not doing it, you're not that thing. Like right now, I'm a podcaster. I'm not a musician. I'm not a music producer. I'm not anything I'm not doing right now. I'm not that thing. I'm only that thing when I'm doing it. And right now I'm being a podcaster. And I like this way of thinking because it often motivates me to get going. It helps me get started. And I like to think of like, what do those people with those titles do? Music producers produce music. And I think this is a good thing to remember as we fill our hard drives with unfinished tracks and loops that we'll never ever publish or put out. You have to produce music. You have to make music to be a music producer. So maybe you might be a music fiddler or a loop maker or a unfinished song producer, but until you finish things, you're not a music producer. And I like to use that to motivate myself into actually getting stuff done and finishing ideas, because you're not that thing unless you do that action. Guitar players play guitar, so you have to play your guitar. Painters paint. You have to paint if you're a painter. If you're not painting, you're not a painter. It helps get you in the mood, I think, because if it's something you want to be, you'll then have to do those actions. And sometimes I think about that when I'm doing my own work as a music producer. One thing I know we all love to do is learn about music production, watch tutorials, watch other people make music. In those cases, I would say I'm a student of music production. I'm not actually producing music. And I might also say I'm a procrastinator because I might be secretly trying to avoid work by educating myself. And when I get this thought in my head, it often gets me to work. I think if you're a music producer, you you produce music. That's probably like 80% of the time. The other stuff that you do could be the 20% of the time, the learning or the experimenting, but the actual making music thing should actually be the first thing you do. It can be a way to maybe give yourself that honest kick in the butt that might help. So what can you do if you want to be, say, a professional at this? Act professionally. Do it. Treat it like a job. Make a schedule. And during that time, that's what you have to do. Time box that schedule even. Maybe make a certain percentage of your time about learning a new instrument or plugin or learning some techniques. But make sure when you time box your scheduled time as a music producer, you allocate 80% or so of that time towards making music. 80% is just a number I picked, but I think it's a good way to just remind yourself that you need to be doing it. You need to be working at it. And that's the only way this stuff gets done, and that's the only way you become that thing. I think as we get older, we have this aversion to kind of owning new labels, new jobs, new titles that we never really had before. But I do notice when I observe young people, teenagers especially, I guess is what I'm thinking of here in high school, that they'll very often just sort of like change who they are. Sometimes over the summer or even during a vacation will come by and they show up. Some of them will come back in like all new clothes with a new style, new interest, and they just own that thing. It's like, well, now I'm a surfer kid, or now I'm this art kid or music kid, or now I'm into sports, or whatever it is they decide is interesting or cool to them. Sometimes you see kids just radically reinvent themselves. and it's something you really don't see in adults. Adults tend to sort of get get like in their rut, I guess. Maybe you can look at it as a rut. They get kind of in this like one thing that they are for the rest of their life. And kids don't have that like hold up. They don't worry about that too much. They know they're still developing and becoming who they are as a person, so they're happy to just try out new things. And I think it's pretty cool to see, in all honesty, people actually experimenting, like acting the part, being that thing that they might want to be and testing it out. I mean, how else do you know, right? How else would you know if you're talking about being a music producer, like how else would you know if you like it unless you really do the thing, you really act that way? You might decide it's not the part of music you like. You might decide that there's something else you prefer. Maybe it's performance or I don't know. But this idea of just do the thing that the person that you're trying to be would do. Act that way. And you don't have to worry about people judging you too much. They'll fall in line pretty quick, especially if you don't announce it. I think about myself in this when I started producing Ableton Live Packs, which also happened to be in March, and that was, I guess, like 9 years ago now when I made my first Ableton Live Pack. I was really just learning how to use Ableton Live, coming from Logic and then Pro Tools and all of that. And I didn't know a whole lot about it, but I was starting to learn how to use the sampler and starting to figure out how to build instrument racks with it. So I made one, and just kind of on a whim, I put it online. I'd seen some people doing tutorials online and sharing things, so I was like, let me try that. I think I got a cool sound. Let's see if anyone wants it. And the one I put out was a laptop feedback instrument where I had the microphone too loud on the computer and the speakers on the computer, like right on your laptop, and they're so close together that it immediately causes feedback. And I recorded that and made that into an instrument rack. You can still get it now. It's free on my site. But I was really surprised at how many people downloaded it, so I just kept doing it because it was working. It was getting me something of an audience. I started doing it every week, and by doing that, I was acting the part. I didn't quite realize I was doing that, but I was acting the part. This is what people that make content do. This is what sound designers do. This is like what music producers do, maybe. And what I found out real fast and what was surprising to me is that people started reaching out to me and asking me questions like I was some kind of expert in live and music production, as if I suddenly knew all of this stuff just because I was putting stuff out and, I guess to them, acting the part. I didn't get anyone saying like, you're a fraud. What are you doing putting this stuff out? That's not right. People were really positive and they just sort of accepted me as this expert even. And that kind of made me laugh because I certainly was not. But there's just this, people aren't really thinking about it that much, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So if you're trying to fill this role, don't be afraid of that. Just get to it. And people will very soon just take you as that person that does that thing. And by doing my live packs regularly, it created this habit of working. And I learned Ableton Live really well through doing that. I started getting more curious about other aspects of the software. And pretty soon I would consider myself an expert, like that I knew what I was doing. I felt really comfortable in it. And it was only through that I ever became a certified trainer. It was just the consistency. I was acting like a certified trainer. I was doing things they did. I was making tutorials, making sound packs, making music, using the software all the time, and even teaching a little bit. So if you just do the thing and act like the thing, you become the thing. There's never, ever going to be some kind of validation that you are officially this, you've graduated or you've completed some amount of hours. That doesn't ever come. It becomes very clear to me now as I do start my 4th year of this podcast with this episode. It's like just kind of became something I do, and now it's just something I do. When I first started doing it, it felt weird, felt uncomfortable. It felt funny to say I do a podcast even, but now that's just what I do. And no one complains about it, but no one also just, you're never going to get that validation. And that's the real point I wanted to make in this episode is you are whatever you are in that moment. You are the thing that you are acting like in that moment. This can sometimes help me even when I'm vegging out on the couch. I might ask myself, am I doing the thing a healthy person would do? And I realize that no, I'm behaving like an unhealthy person. So it might help me get up and exercise. Or when I'm making a dinner, it might help me choose a healthier option. And this can also help me when it's time to make music. I say, am I a music producer right now? And the answer is no, I'm not doing that work. I'm sitting on the couch. I'm not actively making music. So what would a music producer do? Well, they go make music. This can be a really helpful, motivating thing, and I invite you to try it out for yourself. But I hope that if you're in a position where you're still questioning yourself, or you're wondering if you're really legit at, producing music or whatever, the answer is if you are producing music, you are. So go do it. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to another 3 years of the podcast. Take care.